a very hot topic, both on the EU and the national levels. So we have the Commission preparing to discuss the non-paper on the ETS2 on the national level. The national social climate plans are still being finalized. And specifically today, we will talk about the perspectives of the Central and Eastern Europe because we see that the backlash and the discussion in these regions is quite heavy and very present. So today on the agenda, we have the presentation of the new study by Victoria Noka from the Oiko Institute. Then we will have a short Q&A, so you will be able to ask questions. And then we have three speakers from the three countries that the study is concentrated on, which is Czechia, Poland, and Bulgaria, to give us their perspectives on the ETS2 and the social climate plans, and on the two key questions of today, and that is who are the vulnerable groups in these countries and what are the policy gaps to address these vulnerable groups. So maybe before we start, few house rules. The session is being recorded. So if you don't want to have your if you want to have your camera off, feel free. The session will be recorded and will be available on YouTube on the channels of Carbon Market Watch and on YouTube. And then for the Q&A, there is a huge number of people here, which I'm very happy about. But to run the session smoothly, I would ask you to put the questions in the chat. Both for the Q&A after Victoria's presentation and for the Q&A after the three perspectives from our speakers at the end. So feel free to put a question in the chat once you think about it anytime, and I will then, when the time starts, the time comes, ask the questions from the chat. And last but not least, I would also like to thank the Life Effect Project and the whole organization team for the smooth organization and for bringing everything up to this moment where we can finally start to discuss. So that's it from me. And now I would like to welcome here Victoria Noka, a researcher from the Oiko Institute, who has been in charge of the study for the last few months. I think did a great job in answering the question of what are the vulnerable groups and what are the important policy gaps in the CE countries. She's an expert in the Oiko Institute with a long history of concentrating on the energy and transport poverty and the distributional effects of the climate policy, as well as the social climate policy in general. So, Victoria, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much. Let me get up the presentation, and hopefully you can all see that. Perfect. Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction. I also have to introduce and excuse my colleague Nelly Unger. She was the senior data analyst on this study. If you have very specific questions about how the data analysis works, then I might have to refer you back to her. But she's ill today, unfortunately. So yes, we did the study Social Impacts of the ETS2. We were looking at Bulgaria, at Czechia, and Poland. Those were the 3 member states we're looking at. And the objective of the study was to provide an overview of who are these potentially vulnerable groups with regard to the ETS2, specifically focusing on these 3 countries. And we did this on the one hand by looking at data on energy poverty as well as on income and kind of living conditions. And by reviewing the draft social climate plans as far as they were available and carrying out some expert interviews to offer some insights into possible priority groups for further policy development and to identify gaps based on the current plans, kind of not also only looking at the social climate fund and the social climate plans, but also looking at possible kind of ETS2 revenue usage. Now, I'm sure that I don't have to explain in much detail the ETS2 or the Social Climate Fund. I'll just give a brief introduction. Anyway, the ETS2 will be introduced in 2027 for the buildings and the road transport sectors across the EU. In this study, we only focus on the building sector and not on the transport sectors. In parallel, the Social Climate Fund was implemented to support energy poor and vulnerable groups to help offset some of these negative distributional impacts that we anticipate as part of the ETS2, and to really provide financial support to make energy efficiency improvements, to make technological switches so that nobody is left behind in this process. And at the date of finalizing the study, both Bulgaria and Poland made their draft social climate plans available, so we were able to have a bit more of a detailed look at that, while Czechia was still working under the technical support instrument of the Commission to finalize their social climate plan. Through expert interviews, we managed to get some insights. The Öko Institute is also involved in this technical support instrument, but yeah, those aren't publicly available yet. Now, the reason that we chose these 3 member states is that there's a lot of skepticism around the implementation of the ETS due both on kind of on a political scale, but also in the general public. I'm sure the 3 experts from those countries can say more on that as well. And the idea is that having a good understanding of the social impacts and ensuring that policy is targeted at specific groups can help also improve acceptability for the ETS2. So what data did we use to analyze vulnerabilities in living conditions? We chose EU data sets that are comparable across the member states. On the one hand, that's the Household Budget Survey, the HBS, and the SILC, the Survey for Income and Living Conditions. Now, the HBS we use to look at both absolute and relative heating expenditures, and where possible, where the data is good enough, to also look at expenditures by fuel type so that we have an idea of what kind of groups, what income groups are spending a lot on fossil fuels. And so we disaggregate that by expenditure quintiles. These are a proxy for income quintiles, and by degree of urbanization as well. Just to note, yes, the HBS data is from 2015. This is kind of common practice at the moment because the 2020 data is seen as not 100% reliable due to COVID. And we used the consumer price index to extrapolate the data to 2023. Now, using the most recent SILC database from 2023, we looked at tenure status and dwelling type by income quintiles, degree of urbanization, and household type. And we also looked at the 2 self-reported energy poverty indicators that we have from SILC, households that report the inability to keep their home adequately warm, and households that report arrears on their utility bills. And we look at those by income quintiles, degree of urbanization, household types, dwelling type. And that's quite a lot of information. So I'm just going to show you a few highlights and some summaries within these 3 countries of this data that helps us to identify kind of very specific groups that might be vulnerable. Okay, so what do we see on this first graph here? We have the mean expenditures on heating in absolute and relative terms. So in the bars, you see that mean expenditures on heating increase with expenditure quintiles. So quintile 1 only spends under 200 euros per year on heating, while it's a lot higher, more than double in the fifth quintile, but the relative share of expenditure spent on heating decreases. What's interesting here is that in the dark blue, we see the expenditures on fossil fuels, and these are generally low across all of the expenditure quintiles. So there's a high level of electrification across quintiles. This is for Bulgaria. So you could look at this data and argue, okay, well, households aren't going to be that effective by the ETS2. But the experts that we spoke to, they really argue that especially solid fuel prices are really closely tied to gas prices. And because energy poverty levels are relatively high anyway, they do expect even households who are currently heating with kind of non-fossil fueled related heat sources will probably be affected. And we also see this reflected in the social climate plan. Now, if we look at the Silk data on households in Bulgaria, the way that we structure it is as follows. So we see that 40% of households in the first income quintile, they report that they're not able to keep their home warm. This is incredibly high. Other member states usually have below 20%. And we also see that 31% in this first income quintile report arrears on their utility bills. So these really poor low-income households are particularly vulnerable in terms of energy poverty. We then also see that in the first income quintile, the majority of households are owners, and the majority of households also live in single-family homes rather than multifamily homes or apartments. So this gives us a little bit of an idea of what this group is like. And so we continue this for different types of vulnerability indicators. 21% of households in rural areas report arrears on their utility bills, which is higher than in urban areas. We also have much higher absolute and relative expenditures in rural areas than in urban areas in Bulgaria. And as probably expected, the majority, almost all of the households living in rural areas, they live in single family homes and they are owners. When we differentiate the energy poverty indicator by household types, we also see single parents kind of reporting high share of arrears more than other household types. And these single parents, you know, they're 30% are tenants, so most of them are owners, but the share of tenants is much higher than in other household groups. And the majority of them also live in multifamily homes. So there might be some correspondence there between tenants, single parents who are tenants and who live in apartment buildings. So this is kind of the kind of data analysis that we did for these three countries. This is Bulgaria. And now I will move on to Czechia. Here we see the same kind of data as the first graph that I showed you for Bulgaria. Here the data quality is a little bit better, so we can differentiate more by fuel types, not just fossil and non-fossil fuels. We see gas, oil, and coal playing a significant role here on the fossil fuel side for all income quintiles. But again, the casual trend or the trend we expect of absolute expenditures increasing across quintiles while the relative cost burdens decrease. The share of gas and oil expenditures in particular is higher in the lowest income quintile, but high overall. And if we do the same kind of analysis by degrees of urbanization rather than expenditure quintiles, we see that 77% of households in sparsely populated areas, that's rural areas, they heat or have heating expenditures related to gas, oil, and coal. So very significant issue in rural areas. Now, once again, we use the Silk data to analysis the households a little bit more. We see 14% in the first income quintile reporting the inability to keep home warm, and this also really high cost burdens and reliance on gas and oil in the lowest quintile. A bit more differentiation here than in Bulgaria. We have really a mix of both tenants and owners in the lowest quintile, and we also have a mix of households that live in multifamily homes and single family homes. So there's a bit more of everything in this group than in Bulgaria. We also see this high fossil fuel related heating expenditures in rural areas. Here, again, a similar trend. 90% of households in rural areas are homeowners, 80% in rural areas live in single family homes. This is quite common across the 3 member states that we looked at. Now, once again, single parents stand out among the types of households, as 15% report the inability to keep their home warm. And here, the majority of single parents live in multifamily homes, and about half are tenants. So this share is, again, a little bit higher than it was in Bulgaria. So a little bit of a different group or different housing situations than those living in rural areas, for example. And finally, what's also really interesting in Czechia, we see that 10% of households that live in small multifamily homes, so small apartment houses, report the inability to keep their home warm, which is much higher than households in any other dwelling type. So if we look at that group in a bit more detail, 84% of households in urban areas live in multifamily homes. So a little bit of a different target group there potentially. And finally, let's look at Poland. Here I show the graph not by expenditure deciles, but by degree of urbanization. And very clearly, we can see here the share of expenditure on coal increasing significantly across into sparsely populated areas, the big gray bulk on the right-hand side of the graph. And the share of heat energy in densely populated, so in urban areas, being very high. That's kind of the reliance on district heating networks in urban areas that plays a really significant role there. And although the HBS data for Poland is unfortunately not very good, additional studies from using national data also show really significant shares of expenditures on coal and gas, again, across all income deciles. So what do the households in Poland look like? Well, we have 11% in the first income quintile reporting the inability to keep their home warm, again, significantly higher than in all other income quintiles where this decreases significantly. And in this low income quintile, we have about half living in multifamily homes, other half living in single family homes, so kind of a mix. And we have really, really high shares of ownership of across all income groups. In rural areas, around 74% of households have fossil fuel related heating expenditures. So what do rural households look like? Again, high share of owners, high share of households in single family homes. This is a very consistent finding across all 3 member states. When we look at different household types, we on the one hand, again, have single parents reporting high shares of energy poverty, but also single or one-person households. 8% reporting having arrears on their utility bills and 9% reporting the inability to keep their home warm, much higher than in all other household types. When we look at the single parents, about 30% are tenants. The share is the highest amongst the household groups, but not that high overall. And really interesting, 80% of these single person or one person households are owners, actually. Now, if we look at these multifamily houses, we also see a lot of them reporting the inability to keep their home warm. A lot of households that live in small multifamily homes reporting arrears. So again, these small apartment buildings kind of crystallizing as a key vulnerable group. And we see, again, these one-person households living in multifamily homes. So here we kind of see another interesting cluster of vulnerabilities. Okay, that was quite a little bit of a run through of all of the data we collected. There's a lot of figures in the report. What we summarize from this is that we identified vulnerable groups for each of the 3 countries. So in Bulgaria, we have these really low income homeowners in single family houses in rural areas being really key, but we also have some low income tenants, some single parent tenants in multifamily homes, which are both likely to be living in urban areas. In Czechia, again, low income homeowners in rural areas, but this time both single family homes and multifamily homes being affected, tenants being a significant group, and we have these low income households in these smaller apartment buildings and single parents in multifamily homes, likely in urban areas as well. And finally, in Poland, again, low-income homeowners in single-family homes in rural areas being really significant, low-income homeowners generally being quite affected, and then we have these one-person or single household homeowners in multifamily buildings and single parents who are tenants. Okay, so some of these groups are quite broad, some of them are quite specific. The idea was that we don't just look at the biggest group, but we look at the group that might be the most vulnerable because they might also not be the most obvious group and might not be targeted. So there's some policy gaps that we anticipate. Okay, so what do we do with this information? The second step was to look at what's kind of already happening. What are some of the discourses we need to consider when we do policy design? And to look at the social climate plans and the drafts where we can and try and match, is the what's being planned, does that match what we identify as the vulnerable groups? What do the social climate plans identify as vulnerable groups? And where could maybe the ETS2 revenue go a step further to try and support in addition to the social climate fund? Okay. So we have some of the policy dichotomies and current and planned measures that we discuss. I'm not going to go into too much detail as this is all covered in the report, and I don't want this presentation to take up too much time. So maybe just to highlight some of the key points. So these are the 4.5 dichotomies that we looked at. First of all, the social climate fund has to be targeted. That's very specific, but the way that we use ETS2 revenues is a little bit more open. We have stipulations that we have to use it for climate and social activities, but there's less regulation than in the social climate fund. So first of all, do we target our interventions or do we offer blanket support? Now, there are studies that show there's a much higher acceptability for carbon taxes, specifically when revenues are allocated within the tax domain, when portions are earmarked for low-income households, or when they include targeted compensations. So there's a lot speaking for kind of being targeted in some way, not even just to vulnerable groups, but potentially also targeting interventions there where the energy efficiency savings could be the highest. Second question, do we then finance deep retrofitting or renovations, energy efficiency measures, or do we offer direct financial compensation? Again, the Social Climate Fund is quite clear on how much can be spent on direct financial compensation. It's about 1/3 of the funds available. The rest have to go into energy efficiency. But there are some studies that show direct financial transfers, they tend to have higher favorability amongst those who are opponents of carbon taxes. Some studies show this, others are not so clear. So there is a little bit of an idea. Do we offer direct financial compensation to specific groups, even through ETS2 revenues? But that would kind of defeat the point of the ETS2. So obviously, retrofitting, renovations, energy efficiency investments are absolutely necessary to ensure long-term resilience of households, to ensure that households are able to take part in the transformation process, and that the ETS2 as a climate instrument is working. Then we go on to thinking, okay, well, do we finance these kind of really deep renovations, retrofitting measures, or do we actually also focus on low intervention measures? We find that primarily the draft social climate plans in these 3 countries have focused on extensive renovation programs. These are, however, likely to need financing beyond the Social Climate Fund. And these deep renovations, they are costly, they're time intensive, they can be difficult for households to manage. So it's important that you have kind of additional low intervention measures. These could be advisory programs, informational campaigns, small retrofitting programs, for example, the exchange of electrical appliances or of exchange of windows, things like that, to have kind of uncomplicated support to support vulnerable households as well. I'll give
Sorry
some
to
examples.
interrupt you, Victoria.
Yeah.
I just wanted to let you know that you have about 1 minute, but don't worry.
Okay, but I'm almost there for the 3 countries. Finally, we look at this idea: do we focus on multifamily homes or on single-family homes? And the idea of this landlord-tenant dilemma. We saw from the data there's quite a lot of owners in these vulnerable groups and overall in the 3 countries, but there are few groups of tenants that might need very targeted support. So very quickly, let me show you the way that we analyzed the policy gaps. So here at the top for Bulgaria, you see the 3 groups we identified, and on the left, you see the programs that were written into the draft social climate plans. And just to highlight a few things, there's a targeted renovation program for multifamily buildings. 2/3 of the funding in the building sector is going into this program, which is interesting because low-income homeowners in small family houses were identified as a main group. And although there is a warm homes program, that's only receiving very limited funding at the moment. So there's a bit of a mismatch in the funding. There is some availability to do renovations in these multifamily buildings, but only for owners. There's currently no provisions on how to deal with tenants. So there's some tension there in the groups that we identified and in the way that funding is being allocated. We also see a program on energy efficient appliances being exchanged, which is an interesting low intervention measure as well. In Czechia, we have the New Green Savings Light program, which is a continuation of the New Green Savings program, which has been running for a few years. This is kind of the flagship program. It's not specifically targeted at single family homes or multifamily homes. Both can profit, so that's quite a well-targeted program. And we also have a targeted renovation program of apartment buildings where provisions are planned for landlords, such as rental contract rules, that are part of the eligibility criteria, which is really positive to see for tenant groups. And finally, in Poland, we have an interesting way of focusing the direct financial support. It's only targeted at low-income pensioners currently who are reliant on fossil fuels, which is really closing the group, the vulnerable group down, and doesn't really match with what we found in our data in terms of targeting. And their clean air program is considered the flagship program. There, it's targeted at single family homes, which is good because that's one of the main groups that we also identified. And then we have some kind of additional municipal housing programs, which could potentially support tenants as well, and some advisory programs, which are an important additional measure to supporting vulnerable households. Really key here, low-income homeowners in multifamily homes are not being addressed at all currently in the Polish Social Climate Plan, a real gap in the plan as we see it. Okay, so to come to the end, so we have some time for questions. These are some of the general policy recommendations that we formulated based on these findings and on these gaps. It's a lot more detail in the study if you're interested. But of course, the targeting of vulnerable groups remains key, especially as we think about ETS2 revenues. It's really important to address policy gaps and areas with high savings potentials, such as worst performing buildings. Policy design absolutely needs to consider the current housing situations of vulnerable households. We already see a lot of that in the social climate plans, which is great, but really thinking about how to allocate funds to support tenants, or kind of this focus between single family and multifamily homes. There are potentially some adjustments needed. We obviously want investments to ensure really long-term transformations in the building sector, so improvements to energy efficiency, investments into low and zero carbon technologies to really ensure the ETS2 is working, rather than focusing on kind of direct financial compensation for too long. And of course, these deep retrofitting measures are needed for long-term resilience, for the functioning of the ETS2. And really key here is to make sure that we have good upfront financing for low-income households, even beyond the social climate funds, so that everyone can kind of take advantage of these programs. Okay, this is me. This is an owl thanking you for your attention. And yeah, I think we have some time for questions and answers now. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's really interesting, both from the data perspective as well as from the policy perspective. And also thank you. There's already a few questions as well as comments in the chat. So thank you all for bringing up the additional resources. I think that's very useful, and also for asking questions. So I will go directly into that. And first of all, as for the use of the data and maybe for the methodology, Martin is asking regarding the inability to keep home warm indicator, whether you took into account the potential disparities between the mean comfort expectations in the three countries, meaning that like in one country it can be 19 degrees, in another country it can be 23 degrees. So that's one question for the methodology. Another one, Eva brought up the EU silk on socially excluded localities and is asking whether you took a look on the on that specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. So the question of what the subjective indicators or the self-reported indicators on the inability to keep home warm is quite a general discussion in the energy poverty indicator domain. Because it is a commonly used indicator on the EU level, we don't look at these kind of specifics, also because the aim of the study wasn't to look at energy poverty indicators in detail, so that was just not something we could do. But of course, it's a self-reported indicator, and there will be differences in who thinks they have the ability to keep their home warm. What we do in that indicator is that we only look at the bottom 3 income deciles, I think, or bottom 5. So anybody who's in has high income and says they can't keep their home warm is not considered energy poor per this indicator, for example. But it's not something that we could look at specifically in this study. Yeah, and thanks to Eva, for those additional silk data points. I think we considered looking at housing cost overburden, but decided against it because there were already a lot of different matches and a lot of different figures we were looking at. And the arrears on utility bills was the second energy poverty indicator that we considered, which is also, I mean, this is for Czechia, but it's relatively low. If I remember correctly, the arrears on utility bills are only below 2%. And so, yeah, but thank you for quoting that study below as well. We'll be sure to have a look at it.
Amazing. So then there is a question on whether do you have a data on the current energy subsidies for the various income deciles in the three countries. So that's again more into the data. But as from the policy perspective, there is a debate on the communication, which I find very interesting. So that the rough conclusion may be that rural areas will be targeted by the anti-ETS2 communications, which the NGOs do not usually reach. So I would just want to ask you whether you would confirm that the rural areas seem to be the most impacted, and whether you see a communication or a policy gap in there.
Mm. Yeah, I think what's definitely clear is that the reliance on fossil fueled heating is much higher in rural areas. Maybe not so strong in Bulgaria, although still there, but definitely in Czechia and Poland, because they don't have access to the district heating network. So it is quite likely that they are going to be feeling their costs going up the most. Also because, I mean, we don't have very good silk data on the housing condition, but these houses tend to be older in rural areas, so they need kind of quite extensive energy efficiency upgrades. They're quite expensive. And if there's kind of not as great connections to your kind of local agencies and things like that, it's a lot harder for those households to even know what they can do about these rising costs. They feel very alone with this issue. I think something that's really good in the Polish social climate plan draft, there's a lot of provisions for regional support as well. So kind of regional authorities getting money to have people trained as energy advisors and to be able to give households support to actually understand what kind of financing is available to them, what they can do to improve their energy efficiency and lower their bills. So it's important that there's some financing to support local agencies as well. And I mean, I'm not an expert on the politics in those three countries, but I know it from Germany that the kind of more conservative, more right-wing voting population is also in rural areas. And of course, they will also be affected by higher transport costs. This wasn't considered in this study, but the transport poverty in various dimensions, acceptability, availability, accessibility, costs is much higher in rural areas anyway. So we kind of have a double kind of cost burden that's increasing for these households. So we really need to make sure that we're reaching them.
Thank you for this, both for the question and for the answer. I mean, I think it's a very important issue to concentrate on. So I would like to close the Q&A. We will still have one more, so feel free to still write your questions or comments or other links to resources to the chat. I think that's very useful. Also, to kind of connect across the CE regions and to share the insights. Thank you, Victoria, for the study and for the presentation. It was very insightful. And now we will hear the perspectives from our three speakers, starting with the Czech Republic. So I would like to welcome Rebecca Hengalová, who is a research fellow at the European Green Europe project, who is concentrated on the social climate policy, specifically looking at the helping with the preparation of the social climate fund in the Czech Republic. Welcome, Rebecca. I will give you the floor. You have 5 minutes, and again, I will tell you 1 minute before the end.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you for inviting me to speak here. I have purposefully titled my part of the presentation Implementation or Stagnation, Avoiding the ETS2 in Czechia, because I wanted to very briefly highlight how much the current Czech government and opposition are resisting the implementation of ETS2. And then I will, of course, answer the questions that you have outlined for us, the vulnerable groups and policy gaps in addressing or helping these groups. So what is quite interesting and sad as well in the process of transposing ETS2 in Czechia is that we are still only halfway through. In December 2024, the monitoring and reporting part has been transposed. And ever since then, and also before then, there has been a very negative and extensive media coverage. There's of course fear-driven reporting that uses narratives such as personal freedoms versus the dictate from Brussels, and it also goes all the way to strictly anti-EU rhetoric. There's also quite an inflated sense of price increases. They're being reported on a daily basis. For those of you that speak Czech or may be really interested and want to go to this link, to this graph and translate it in your browser, I've linked a very interesting study that actually highlights how much the respective goods would be more expensive, by how much they would be more expensive. You have already mentioned briefly the Czech non-paper that was delivered to the Commission, so I think we can skip that because there is no news to my knowledge. I hope at least some of you will have smiled because of this horrible picture. This is the expectation after our parliamentary elections in October 2025, so in 2 to 3 weeks. The most likely outcome is that the former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš will win again. His party is quite populist and definitely right-wing. So the possible outcomes are either that the ETS2 will be deemed the former government's mistake, and then the Prime Minister will pretend that he has negotiated the amounts under the Social Climate Fund for Czechia as a compensation, or ETS2 is going to continue to not be implemented, further ignoring Czechia's commitment to EU climate policy. So those are quite negative outcomes. Perhaps not surprising to some of you. I saw some Czech names in the chat. Who will be most affected by ETS2 and arguably also not by ETS2, by not transposing it and not benefiting from the revenues of emission trading? I've divided these groups into housing and transport. The study presented by Victoria was focused mostly on housing. However, I focus mostly on transport poverty. So perhaps your questions can go in that direction, should you have any. When it comes to housing, of course, the most at-risk and vulnerable groups, as has already been outlined, are renters and seniors, and particularly widowed senior women living in single-family homes. That comes out of data available in Czech Republic because they are unable to pay the bills for heating. When it comes to transport poverty, it's surprisingly not really seniors, but it's young families with small children. They are either like two adults or
1 minute, Rebecca.
single family homes. And we can see a lot of transport poverty, especially on the inner peripheries of the 14 regions that comprise the Czech Republic. As was already mentioned in the Q&A, The main risk is the continued disenfranchisement of these groups that are most likely to be targeted and susceptible to populist narratives, as we see, for instance, with the motorist party. And there's some information on the Czech climate plan that you can read perhaps later if you're interested. What is important to mention is that the current Czech government is scrambling to deliver this to the Commission, who claims that they will not even open it and review it because we haven't adopted ETS2 fully. And we're all hoping that the new government will implement the plan, but there is no certainties. So perhaps I'll stop now and leave a lot of time for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this, for the look into the future, although it can be a little depressive. And let's just jump straight into the next presentation, which is by Michal Wojtylo from Poland's Reform Institute, who is a leading researcher on the public policy, on just transition, and on decarbonization. So, Michal, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Michał Wojtyło from the Reform Institute Polish think tank. Before I share the two slides I prepared, which are very specific, I would like to add some general remarks when it comes to our today's event on the biggest challenges concerning the ETS2 and social climate fund implementation, which are kind of foundation of the state we are in now, with backlash towards green transition and the ETS2 implementation. One of those that Victoria also said about, and I would like to underline it, is the underlying lack of trust of this society towards the state in Poland over the many past years, and that it was also fueled by not transparent way of spending of ETS1, lack of understanding, and it all translated into this hesitancy when it comes to tax-related instruments in public policy and landscape. And so this is the first point. The second one I would like to point out concerning Poland. Poland is kind of specific because we do not have national carbon tax on building sector, on coal. So any eventual shock concerning the ETS2 implementation is going to be much bigger than the ones in the countries which already do have carbon tax, but which may be just lower than ETS2 when it arrives. And another overall remark towards public policy, there is a huge challenge, especially in the energy poverty and transport poverty issues, that these are multidimensional issues, and because of that they need holistic strategies, long-term planning, and that is what is lacking, at least in Poland. And social climate plan is a good step in the right direction. The draft we've seen at the end of June is something that we can build on, work on. And with that, I want to share just two slides, so I will be quick. And of course, it's not sharing. But
In the
I am
meantime,
working.
thank you. Yeah, it seems that it started working, but in the meantime, can you maybe speak up a little bit
Oh,
louder
sorry.
so that everyone can hear?
Yeah, sure, sorry. So yes, I'm gonna speak up as you asked. And with the main hotspots in Poland concerning ETS2 is coal heating, still over 3 million. Sorry, that, yeah, okay. So over half of single-family buildings in Poland use solid fuel to heat them, and it's mainly coal. So as you can see on the graph from one of our recent reports on ETS2 and Social Climate Fund, the shock concerning ETS2 when it comes to coal is much bigger than with gas. And this is really the one point overall that I would like to make as the most important, the biggest challenge. And any thinking of ETS2 implementation in Poland, it will be the discussion about coal. So as you can see, the first 3 deciles will probably see the biggest challenge in terms of ETS2 for coal. And for gas, the difference is much smaller. So the one is the heating source, and also, as Victoria pointed out, very important is district heating. If it's available, the energy poverty is much lower in Poland. So that translates that in the rural areas, the problem will be the biggest, if much bigger than in urban areas, and in the single family houses. Also, most of the buildings are are owned by private people, and the another challenge would be elderly living in too much on their own in the big houses in the rural areas. And just finishing my presentation, if it's working, and it's working. The building renovation, I would like to point out that it's not only about changing the heating source, it's also about insulation, about renovation, deep renovation. In Poland, we had recently some problems with our clean air program that was mentioned, because heat pumps were put in very low energy efficient houses, and the rise of bills was dramatic in some of the cases. At least that was the narrative. It really was, if it was the lowest energy efficient houses. So you have to be holistic in your policies, not only change the heating source, also not only insulate your home, also think about services in local areas, about transport sector, because in Poland also, as ETS2 also impacts transport sector, that also is the case in the rural areas. The important that the public transport service is inefficient, still inefficient. So you have to think about everything, all of these issues at once when thinking about it. And Polish Social Climate Plan is very multidimensional. It has 6 billion for building sector, 3 billion for transport sector, and over 5 and 7 nearly 6 billion euros of direct income support. So and as Victoria said, there's 15% of funds managed at regional level. So there's a lot of going on. Very good first step. We have to look what are the effects and build on that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this, Michal. And it's really crazy to see the number of 3 million households in a single family homes. That really puts it into perspective. Let's jump to the presentation of our last speaker, and that is Sviatoslav Stoikov from the Zazemiata, the Friends of the Earth, Bulgaria, who is the project coordinator of the Building Renovation and Clean Heating Program, and also an energy efficiency expert. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this event. I don't have a presentation, but briefly I will summarize what is going on with the social climate plan and the ETS2 implementation in Bulgaria. So the thing is that I will start with the household energy use. As it was mentioned in the study, Bulgaria is largely electrified, and the percentage of natural gas and coal, it's relatively small. So natural gas consists of something like 4%, less than 4%, and coal usage of around 5% in the household energy use. Firewood, it's something very important for Bulgaria. So a bit more than 1/3 of all the households in Bulgaria are heating themselves with firewood. So maybe we can talk about this in the Q&A session. But the scale of the challenge is quite big. So we have 93% of the Bulgarian buildings, they do not meet the energy efficiency standards and requirements that we have right now. And although we have a definition of energy poverty, there is still no working mechanism to identify energy poor and affected households. So a clear national definition and methodology, a clear national methodology is urgently needed to avoid arbitrary criteria set by individual municipalities. So a little bit about the multifamily building program in the social climate plan. So there is a proposed scheme again, which includes including 100% public funding for all households in a small number of selected buildings. So the thing is that this universal approach is quite unfair. Limited resources are going. The limited resources should target only socially vulnerable and energy poor households, which is not most probably going to be the case. And without proper mechanism to identify the energy poor, support risk going to the households that do not need it. So, and currently, which is really important, the municipalities in Bulgaria are tasked with identifying the buildings with high shares of energy poor households, but they lack the data and capacity to do so. So the thing is that some kind of national methodology should be built. And the plan foresees support for 25,000 vulnerable households, while the real number is over 1 million. This is only for the multifamily buildings. And we have something like 60,000 multifamily buildings in need of renovation in Bulgaria. And basically the plan in this part risks inefficient spending of public resources. This is what we are seeing right now. And for the single family buildings, the warm home measure, which was mentioned in the presentation, for the first time, we have a program for single family buildings, which is a little bit more targeted. And it includes 12,000 homes out of 1.3 million single family buildings. But again, the grants risks not going to households that really need the support. Municipalities lack the capacity to implement in most of the cases, and beneficiaries lacking technical supports and help with applications for households. There is no one-stop shop plan for the program. So again, with our quite bad mechanisms for application, it risks to exclude a large number of people. And some positive elements is a voucher scheme that we have for efficient cooking appliances, that it's included in the social climate plan, which is a positive, but it's too limited. And the inclusion of energy communities, it's also really interesting. But there is a 50% co-financing requirement, which basically excludes the energy poor who wants to be part of it. And in summary, what I want to tell, it's again, as in Poland and in Czech Republic, maybe there is lacking of a holistic strategy and of long-term planning. And the identification that you made, basically, it's correct in my opinion, and a really big support is needed for rural areas and for single-family homes in rural areas, and also for tenants in multifamily buildings. But the thing is that the funding for multifamily buildings, it's going only to the owners and not to the tenants. So it's a little bit unclear what is going to happen. So Bulgaria's the social climate plan for Bulgaria still faces major gaps, and the biggest issue maybe is that the ETS2 has not been transposed nationally yet, and the public awareness of the ETS2 and its link to the social climate fund remains very low. So either the social climate plan or nor the ETS2, it's really known. So there is not a lot of media coverage in the country happening around this issue. And what is really important, it's also that the experts stress that the proper studies and clear methodologies for identifying vulnerable households must be finalized before the final approval of the social climate plan, which is something really important. Yes, I mentioned that there are also some positive elements, the warm homes program, which is really limited, but it's a good start, and the efficient cooking equipment voucher scheme, plus the first inclusion of the energy communities. So in conclusion, what I can say is that we have maybe a triple challenge, that weak targeting of vulnerable groups, it's present in Bulgaria. We have a huge stock of unrenovated buildings, and funding basically favors stronger municipalities. Funding, we don't have a regional balance, so regional allocation, and basically the stronger municipalities who have built one-stop shops, for example, in the past, they are clearly going to receive the most benefits of the plan. Of course, there are opportunities, but if targeting is improved and transparency is ensured, so the plan can move closer to its promise, basically to leave no one behind. But what I can say is that the ETS2, it's not really well known, and its effect in the media in Bulgaria, which is maybe a little bit different than in the other countries.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for bringing the positive examples. I think that's very needed. So I see a discussion in the chat. I am inviting the speakers also. Like there is a question on the study, so if you want to answer directly in the chat, that's also possible. We will probably get to the question of biomass heating, because that comes up quite a lot. But first of all, let me ask a question to all the speakers, because we still have a little bit of time. And the question is, what is one thing that is going well in your country, and that you want to highlight as maybe an inspiration? And what is one thing related to the ETS2 or the social climate funds that you are afraid of for the future? So one thing that is going good, one thing you're afraid of. And we can start in the same order. So Rebecca, if you may.
Yes, thank you for bringing also, or pushing us to bring some positive news. I think one positive aspect that's been sort of mentioned already is the new green savings program, subsidy program targeting renovation into a higher energy efficiency standard in Czech Republic, and specifically its revision from this February 2025 that allows all subsidies to be paid out prior to the renovation ex ante, and therefore allows to service a much wider group of applicants, especially given the context that roughly 14% of Czechs cannot afford a one-time expense of 400 euros, an unexpected expense. So there's clearly a lot of very tight budgets in Czech households, and in that context, it is fairly unimaginable that someone would undertake some sort of large-scale renovation and only receive money afterwards. So I think that is positive, and it helps with the generally fairly good public image of the subsidy program. One thing I'm afraid of is that the more we are mapping transport poverty in Czech Republic and across Europe, the more it seems to very much mimic, let's say, a map of general poverty. So it seems to be a very tricky, very sticky situation that cannot really be solved only by social climate fund and the available measures. So my worry is that the idea of solving transport poverty and any impending ETS2 effects with something as small as social climate fund is fairly tone deaf. And my personal worry is that if such a communication reaches a certain demographic, that will lead to even more disenfranchisement. So I think it's not doing a really good service to the general narrative about not only climate policies, but also any kind of innovation, renovation, public goods, etc. Thank you.
Okay, Michal?
So I would like to point out that in the social climate plan, the Polish one, the draft one, there was more than I expected of social housing. And with social housing is very good instrument in terms of tackling not only energy poverty, but also transport poverty if done right. So it's more like long-term instrument to change the situation. For example, the widow, elderly widow in rural area, somewhere where there's a lack of public transport, and she doesn't have her own car or she cannot drive because of some health issues. There are many reasons for that. So this housing, of course, the social housing is not the only one instrument. It has to be one of many, but it's really a holistic instrument to look at and to use and to tackle both problems at the same time. And I'm afraid of, because social climate fund and social climate plan, which uses this funds, is quite limited in terms of funds. But that's only the part of the picture. The other part of the picture is the ETS2 revenues, which we can use for the same aims or even enlarge it to bigger share of the population. And my worry is that the ETS2 revenues are not going to be used for the ones that need it the most, but they're going to be used for some other instruments that do not target well the energy and transport poor population.
Thank you. And lastly, Svetoslav.
Yes, I will start with the positive thing. For me, it is the voucher scheme that we are seeing in the plan, the voucher scheme for efficient cooking appliances. But my opinion is that it has a potential to be improved, to be enlarged, with including maybe solar thermal or balcony scale, small scale PV installations, and a few other appliances. It is a good start, and I see it as a huge positive. And also the public opinion of the voucher scheme, it's quite good in Bulgaria. So it is time that we test it. And what I really worry, it's the thing that I mentioned. It is the allocation of funding. So the thing is that how to make sure that the money are going to the people who actually need them, without a clear methodology for identifying energy poor households. This is the biggest thing that I can see, because for example, in one multifamily building, when there are, I don't know, 10, 100 apartments, for example, and 10 energy poor households, the case is in Bulgaria that the rest 90 apartments are going to benefit 100% of this funding. So they're going to benefit at the same scale as the people who cannot afford the measures. So this is my biggest worry right now.
Yes, it is super important, and it also ties to the discussion mentioned in the report of the conflicts maybe between the investment and the direct support, or the deep renovations or the shallow renovations, as well as the kind of conflict between that was mentioned in the chat between supporting the energy efficiency measures or directing the attention more towards the changing of the heat source, even if the energy efficiency is not on the highest level. So these are all very important conflicts that I see in the countries that you can comment on. But coming back to the Q&A, I wanted to bring up a question asked before, maybe to all of our AT participants still. There was a question whether you know about any lessons learned on the communication following the backlash of the Green Deal. So if there is any resources or suggestions on that, that was the questions from the chat. But maybe to our speakers, and Victoria, feel free to also comment. I wanted to ask you about the direct payments. What is your perspective on the direct compensations, and is it something that is planned in your country?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of discussion whether direct compensation. I mean, we have the Klimabonus, which was in place in Austria. There's a big discussion on the Klimageld in Germany still happening, which I mean, I think for a while there was a lot of kind of push towards these things because there's a bit of a question of how would the distributional mechanism of this work. I think that's kind of the main issue there. How do you decide who gets it and how do you get that money to them? It's not as easy, especially when you have kind of strong data protection laws in place. The thing is, those kinds of measures, they're very, very expensive. So as has been said in the chat, if we want to fund something like this, it has to come through ETS2 revenues. I think personally, those kinds of measures can have a positive impact if they're targeted and if they're limited in the time frame that they're applied. So we know that they can improve acceptability and they can be kind of a good instrument to show people that we're kind of paying back some of the income from the ETS2, but also the studies are not 100% clear whether there is such a high acceptability, whether the effect is really that great that it's worth spending all of this money on this instrument. It's money that we're using not using for something else, right? I think this is the question. Is it useful enough? Is the effect of improving acceptability within the general public or really supporting vulnerable households by supporting them financially? Is that really going to work in the way that we want it to work versus putting that money into energy efficiency investments? I personally think that it's not going to work long term because once you start subsidizing energy prices, it's very hard to take that back. So once you start doing it, you're kind of stuck with it a lot of the time. I think it's probably not where the majority of the financial focus should go, in my opinion.
All the others, do you agree, disagree? Anything to add?
Maybe I can just add a little bit for Bulgaria, because the thing is that for quite a long time we have a thing called the winter subsidy scheme, which is running year after year, and it is supporting vulnerable households, giving them a certain amount of money in order to buy firewood, mostly for the winter. And the thing is that what we are seeing in this program, it's that year after year, the same households are being supported. So the thing is that they're just being given money for firewood to, I don't know, to get over the winter somehow, to manage. But the thing is that they are not being targeted for any kind of energy efficiency improvements. So their situation stays the same year after year. So this is something that we have to think of with the direct payments. If it's going to work long term, how we can basically remove the people from the group of energy poor.
If I may add a few sentences, what I think is an interesting perspective that you have very skillfully crafted within the three speakers that we have here today is a certain cultural background. I think in post-communist countries, it's far less acceptable to even consider direct income support that would not be earmarked for a specific cause or for a specific group, the same way that was the case in Austria and Germany. At least in the discussions about transport poverty and measures tackling that at the Czech Ministry of Environment, the discussion immediately turned into, and forgive my phrasing, but should poor people go to the cinema, for instance? So that really was quite eye-opening. That the debate about direct income support in any which way, be it earmarked for a specific type of goods or service or earmarked for a specific group, was just at the very beginning. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up, that there are clearly very cultural and specific differences.
Thank you, everyone. I think this is a very lively debate, and the question is still there of how much should go for the direct payments, and whether the direct payments should be directed towards the vulnerable groups, or it should go more in the climate dividend scheme to everyone. Michal, you still wanted to say something?
Yes, some short remarks. One remark that in Poland we use the energy voucher to enlarge our database. So because people applied for the voucher, we get to know who is energy poor, who is using coal. We didn't have that information before. Of course, the data is not perfect, but it can be a basis to policy making. That's one thing. The second one is, I think in the transition phase, we have to have some kind of support financial, because the transition and any investment is going to take time. And the third point, I think controversially maybe, that as Sviatoslav said, there shouldn't, I mean, this case of putting money for firewood, or in Poland putting money for coal, for people to buy coal, it would be better for some universal direct financial support. So they do not have to buy coal or wood for that. They can buy some other services and target them in terms of their income, in terms of their heating source. This is where they should be targeted, not on what they spend. And also that brings in the other dimensions, such as transport poverty. So someone may have enough money to pay for coal, but doesn't, with transport, it's easier to neglect transport, to move less because you don't have money. But then you can buy a ticket for a bus to see your family, and that decreases also transport poverty if you do not have this necessity to buy coal or any other fossil fuel.
Okay, thank you for the lively debate here and in the chat as well. We have 5 last minutes before the closing. So, and the biomass question is still open and live, but I wanted to maybe ask you for a closing remarks, and maybe some things that did not have not been covered, or some things you want to stress out. And I will give an example because I think that a very important question that is sometimes overlooked is the other ETS2 revenues outside of the Social Climate Fund. So we are talking a lot on the Social Climate Fund, but there will be other money to spend. We know that the Social Climate Fund is not of the amount that would solve all our transportation and buildings decarbonization problems, as well as providing the necessary support to the social groups. So I would, as the closing remark, I will stress that, and also leave you the space if you have any things to add towards the end. And you can go as you like.
Okay, so I'll rip off the band-aid and start with the closing. I think what perhaps hasn't been said, and for good reason, is that there's still a sizable group of populations that are falling through all of the metrics that we are currently using to measure energy and transport poverty, be it people that are not tracked in census, or they're not reporting that they're having to go somewhere or having to heat something. And there's, of course, questions of their further socioeconomic status, and perhaps those could be accounted for when it comes to coming up with ways to invest ETS2 revenues. So not just strictly groups of people that are affected by ETS2 increase in prices, but in general, vulnerable parts of society. I think in Czech Republic there's ground on which we can build to expand and make more flexible the system of public transport with on-demand transport and also shared micromobility. But I think we still have ways to go, especially when it comes to the mapping of who are these people that we are saying we are trying to help. So that is a big open question that remains for me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna just say that and link it to what I said at my first speech, that we are in the world that we need fiscal space to pay for military spending, for any other spendings. There are so many challenges before us, and ETS to revenues is a way in societies that are not so prone to tax instruments to find the money to invest in for example, social spending, such as housing, such as direct income support for the really lowest income group, especially the ones that, as Rebecca said, the ones that cannot be supported through social climate fund because they are not directly affected by the ETS too, and they are objectively energy poor. And it's also a way, and the need for Poland in terms of renovation is so huge that it's really hard to see how the government, how the state is gonna finance it without any new additional inflow of funds. Of course, I think there's at least some of it should be some more about co-financing the private investment, so it's more effective. But overall, there is a need for additional funds, for public spending, also to leverage the private market to bring this renovation wave to a success, because that is one of the biggest challenges, I think, in terms of where are we now in Poland.
Thank you.
Yes, so final remarks from my side too. And the Social Climate Fund, it's a very small part of the picture, basically. And the thing is that currently in Bulgaria, there are some political talks about the revenues for the ETS, ETS2, and also the revenues from the ETS1, they were going to the Electricity System Security Fund, which basically supports electricity producers and not any climate action. So there is a political talk in Bulgaria that the revenues from the ETS2 are going to go into the same direction, which we should prevent. And it really makes sense for us to open finally the National Decarbonization Fund, which is an instrument that it's basically lagging behind quite a lot of years already, and to have basically funds to create a permanent pool of money for renovating the building stock and for supporting transport measures too. So yeah, Social Climate Fund is a very small part of the picture, actually.
Thank you. Victoria, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I want to also highlight that the fact that we are getting an ETS too, and that we have a social climate fund, I think are both very positive symbols driving forward the transformation in the buildings in the road transport sector, and an acknowledgement that vulnerable groups will be disproportionately affected by this and need additional support. And kind of Svetoslav already kind of took my main comment as well. Yes, there will be a lot of ETS2 revenues. Yes, they technically have to be allocated in a certain way, but we know from ETS1 revenue reporting that it is very unclear and very hard to track where money is actually going, how it's actually being invested, and that I think it's a really important push from NGOs, from the research community, from the political side to ensure the ETS2 revenues are being used as they should be used and not drowning in some program, in some fund somewhere where we don't know exactly what it is doing. And I think that will be the next big challenge.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for this very lively and important discussion. I hope that we stay connected and that next discussion can also happen in with regards to the CE region, which I find very important, not only in the national level, but also on the European level, as we see the backlash growing in size. So thank you all, and I will now just before we end give the floor to Isleen from Zero, who is our colleague from Life, who will close the session.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again, speakers, for your inputs, and was a really interesting presentation. Thank you, Christina, for helping with the moderation and also organizing the session. My last remark is basically for all of you, if you can take a time and also fill the form that I just shared here in the chat, and also I send by mail when I send all the presentations, to help us to make the next ETS talk better, and also to see your feedback from this session. So also, thank you very much, and keep tuned to also share, follow our project Life Effect. And thank you very much for participating again. Have a nice week.
Okay, and it seems we are ending exactly on time.
Yes.
So looking forward for the presentation and for looking at the resources. Stay tuned and have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye.